welcome back to 27 Cars Radio. Today I'm joined by Justin Knight, a talented author, blogger, and sci-fi enthusiast. I met Justin a little over a year ago. He heard me on another writing podcast and invited me onto his to discuss my work. So given that he recently published a brand new novel entitled Praxis, I wanted to return the favor, given that I love discussing one of my favorite topics under the sun, writing. So thank you so much for taking the time to join me, Justin.
Thanks for having me.
So tell me a little bit about your writing journey. How did you get started becoming an author? Because I find every author has a bit of a unique tale.
It was quite some time ago, back when I was a youngster. We used to spend either weekends or some school holidays around my grandmother's house. And there wasn't much to do there for me and my brother, so we'd either watch the TV that she watched or we'd mess around when she was watching her TV. And my gran, may she rest in peace, she loved her soap operas, and we really didn't. So one day I think she got annoyed of us constantly talking over them, and she gave me a pad and a pen and said, "Shut up and write a story or something." And I thought, well, what do I write about? And I wrote a story based on a computer game I was playing at the time, even drew silly little pictures to go with it. And it just stuck. I spent most of that day making these little books where I'd rip off the bits of A4 from the pad that I'd written on, and then bind it together with knitting wool to make like a mini book.
I used to do that with staples along the side, but it never looked as good.
I found one the other day from one that I'd written a while ago, and it still had the same paper clips or whatever it is holding it together even now, and I just thought, wow, I can't believe it survived.
Hey, that lasts longer than most books. A lot of the binding just wears and tears away, but yours lasted since childhood. It's a pretty good job then.
Yeah, and it sits happily in my room out the way, so I can look at it from time to time.
You know, all these authors want to frame up their book that they finally get published, and I'm like, no, put up the first book you put together as a kid. That's like your first big accomplishment.
I have thought about putting it in the frame, but there's part of me that just wants to leave it as it is, because even the clip that holds it together, I got that from my grandmother's house, and it sounds silly, but there's a sentimental value just to preserving it as it is.
It's not silly, especially when it has something that came from her home, and yeah, that's nice. Now, was it always fiction that you wanted to write? Because I noticed you blog quite a bit about current events.
Yes, because current events aren't fun, especially at the moment.
Yeah, especially right now. Very true.
And what I blog about is just stuff that affects me or I think about personally, and I have issues with it, shall we say, especially the entertainment industry and where it's going, especially games and comics and obviously movies now. There doesn't seem to be much in the way of originality coming out. To take movies, for example, they're either reboots, remakes, or prequel films, and I just can't get into that anymore. So I decided I'd write this stuff. It was just meant for me personally. I didn't expect to have any kind of readership, just so I could get it off my chest and see who else agreed with me. And I have a steady monthly readership of about 100 odd people, which I find bizarre, but at the same time I appreciate it.
Yeah, I totally hear you as far as Hollywood not having anything original, because there are a few novels out there, especially in the indie world, that are so good that I would love to see brought to life on the screen, but they just seem determined to have the same old storyline or to do yet another reboot of the same classic old movie, and it's never as good as the original. And maybe they should be hiring us to be screenwriters.
The thought would be nice, but given the way Hollywood has become, especially lately, I'd rather not.
Yeah, I don't want to get involved in that world. It's a bit icky. Do you see yourself doing nonfiction in the future about any topic, or is fiction just totally where it's at?
Nah, fiction's where it's at. I can have fun with fiction. I can make stuff up, make up worlds. I can make up whole scenarios.
It's like you're God or something, right?
Yeah, maybe, but with adapting or even writing about non-fiction, unless it's a topic that I felt really strongly about, then I couldn't see it happening. I mean, you look at, example, what Hollywood does with true life stories, and
they change it up.
You can tell. Yeah, exactly. I mean, this year, for example, what was the film about the Boston Marathon bombings?
Patriots Day.
yeah, Wahlberg's character in real life didn't exist,
Yeah,
which
he was
kind
an
of puts a
accumulation
bummer
of
on.
characters, right?
Yeah, and with Men of Honor, the film with Cuba Gooding Jr. and Robert De Niro about I think it was the first black Navy master diver. De Niro's character, who pushed him all the way through the film, didn't exist in real life. So,
Kind of ruins it,
no.
yeah.
Yeah, so I don't think I could go near non-fiction because it would take the fun out of it for me to some extent, unless I thought there was a way I could really educate people.
You could be like Truman Capote in Cold Blood and just add in a little fictional pieces in there to your
Yeah,
liking. But I feel
yeah,
like
maybe.
that's when it started going downhill.
Yeah, I mean, In Cold Blood it's one of a kind in terms of story, and it quite rightly has its place among the classics. In fact, if I was to write about any topic at all, one that I watched and read about quite extensively was the Chernobyl disaster.
Oh, wow,
Um,
yeah.
because I once knew this Russian lady who talked about it a little bit because when she was growing up, and when you watch documentaries about it, it's such a horrific topic, and obviously the fallout is still being felt to this day. It's perhaps I could get my teeth into something like that, but no, fiction's where it's at.
Yeah, I like the idea of mixing history with fiction. Kind of like when you think of the big hits, even in film. A lot of times the big ones that are really good, or at least the ones that get a lot of attention, are wrapped around some kind of history. Even
Yeah,
Titanic, I think James Cameron pitched it to the studios. It's Romeo and Juliet on the Titanic. So it's
yeah,
like
yeah.
you take two different things and mash them together. Like Seth
Mm.
Graham Smith, one of my favorite authors. He took Abraham Lincoln, but it's with vampires.
Yes, my
So
wife and
mashups
I,
are fun.
yeah, my wife and I went to see that movie at the cinema, and we thought
The
it was
book is
great.
the book was a lot better,
Yeah,
but yeah, the movie was fun.
but yeah, I mean, perhaps I don't think there's been a really definitive movie about Chernobyl and the fallout from the whole thing. So who knows? Maybe
That's
I was
a
saying
book
I
I'd
would stick my teeth
love.
into.
That's a book I'd love to read, or take a piece of history that people don't really know about that interests you, and bring it to life and get more people interested
Mm.
in that particular topic. Like if you had two genres you could mix up and just have fun with, do a mashup. What would they be?
Ooh, that's a good one. Two genres that I could just mash up.
Or like two themes? Because
Probably,
go ahead.
well, the next book I'm outlining is going to be a mixture of science fiction and horror.
Ooh,
I think those are two topics that go together quite nicely. I mean, take Alien and Aliens, for example. Um, they showed that it could work quite well. I mean, we'll excuse Alien 3 and the fourth one for a moment, but yeah, science fiction and horror. That would be my next one.
yeah. I read a pitch once for a book, and it was like Pokemon meets Alien. So you just take two things that don't really seem they could like they'll fit and mash them up together, and hey, maybe you'll have a hit.
It's a good idea.
So are you more of a pantser or an outliner? Like, do you fly by the seat of your pants and just let the words come, or do you outline and plan things?
Line. It's more comfortable because um, one of the writers I first wrote to when I was a kid many moons ago was Terry Pratchett,
Mm.
and he was the only one that ever responded, and I still have the letter. And one of the bits of advice he gave me was always have an ending in sight. And to me,
Hmm.
that's outlining. So to have an ending, you need to know how you're going to get there. I leave plenty of room for um, things to happen, but I do have an outline in place always.
Do you usually know like the next scene, as it were, or do you like meticulously do everything, but leave a little room for fun, like you said?
No, I leave a little room for fun because at the end of the day, you don't know. I mean, Praxis itself, uh, that turned out to be very different from what I originally saw it as. I mean, obviously, we'll probably get into that later, but because obviously you read the first draft. But
And it changed significantly to the last draft, didn't it?
yeah, um, but no, I don't always like to have it completely set in stone because someone I can't remember who it was now, but someone my wife reads said that the story tells itself. It uses your fingers at the keys,
Mm.
um, and there are a couple of moments in Praxis where they came out of nowhere, and
Hmm.
I
Those are fun.
remembered writing, thinking, okay, where did that come from? and I went with.
So tell me a little bit about your editing process, because I find every author has a little bit of a different twist to it.
In short, painful. Um,
I can attest to that.
yeah, because the first book I put out, I didn't have anyone to edit it. I was very, very big-headed, and I thought I could do it myself, and I did a horrible job with it. So I'm currently going through that to make it a little better. But with Praxis, I had help. Brian Niemeyer came on and said he would edit it. I also had beta readers such as yourself and a couple of others to give me their pointers. And essentially, when I finished Praxis, it was something like 106,000 words long, and I thought I'd written a masterpiece, and I thought I was going to walk out with a head that would be able to fit through the doorway. But then Brian got back to me eventually, and he said a lot of this stuff has got to come out, and it was essentially like that moment where Wile E. Coyote stops at the cliff edge with and I said, what do you mean? And he said basically that it was dragging the story down too much. It wasn't getting into it quick enough, and there were plot elements in there that were not needed, as you probably remember. There was one massive subplot which I thought was brilliant at the time, but when I went back over it with Brian's notes, I could see what he meant. So 106,000 words went down to 81,000 words after I took out a lot of unnecessary fat from the bone, as it were. And I looked at it and thought it's still missing something, but I just couldn't put my finger on it. And I remember sitting there glaring at this screen for, I don't know how long it was, going over what people had said to me. And then I remember the comment you made, and I thought, she's right. So
which one?
A certain part that was missing from it.
Oh, yes, I recall.
Yes. And I thought, my God, I totally overlooked it. So Praxis was reworked. The additional plot points were put in and smoothed in as best as I could. And that went back up to something like 87,000 words. And I looked and thought, okay, this is much better than what I thought it was going to be. And of course, the downfall of it was that I'd put in a very heavy political subplot, and I realized that I'd essentially almost fallen on my own sword. So that subplot was exercised for the good of the story. But after that, I think I went through it 2 or 3 times with Grammarly, twice with this program called Natural Reader, which reads the story to you, and you can usually pick up mistakes, although I'm told I may have missed
I
a
use
couple.
that as well.
Yeah. It's long hours sitting in front of the computer listening to this very robotic voice, which is a killer at times, which is only why I could do a chapter or 2 a day at the max, because it would be so draining. But it's all perseverance. I'm going to try using Scrivener for the next book, so we'll see how that goes. But editing, it's not fun. It really isn't, which is why I'm trying to spare myself the pain with the next one, because with the outline that I've written it specifically with trying to cut out the most unwanted material possible ahead of time so that it's easier for me afterwards. But again, it's a different approach to before, so who knows if it'll work or not.
But now you're well seasoned at this. I feel like going around it the second time, your second book, it gets a little bit easier. No?
We'll see. Is the best
We'll
answer
see.
I can. We'll see. It's at the end of the day, writing the story is fun. It's always fun, but the editing part, I know it's always going to be there. So it's at the end of the tunnel, as it were, and you know you've got to deal with it sooner or later. So it's still a process I'm learning properly. I don't think I'm the best at it yet, but again, time will tell. It's only really Praxis was only really my first big release, and I still have so much to learn from it.
Well, I think you have learned a lot just from when I first read it, and the kind of I watched it go through the process to the finish line. I think you have learned a lot.
Well, again, I hope with the next release that it will show that. But I've had some great people backing me along the way. I've had encouragement from yourself, Brian, Nick Cole, John Mollison, Dominica, uh, John Delarose, of course, folks like Prometheus and Josh as well, if he hears this. It helps to have that behind you, but because you need that for when you get to editing, because the enthusiasm just goes and you have to force yourself back to the in front of the screen to do it. And the best way I found to do that is to just not look at my computer for a couple of days or more after I finished, so that I can look at this thing with a cold pair of eyes and decide what needs to go.
What would you advise writers to stick with as far as like maybe indie publishing or self-publishing? Because these days traditional publishers seem to have kind of lost their mind.
Yeah, I'd say either self-published or indie publishing, because the big five, as it were, it's not an attractive dealer anymore. You look at what Nick Cole went through with Control Alt Revolt.
What did he go through?
He was told either change this particular moment in the story, or they'd drop his contract, and Nick wouldn't budge, so they dropped him. Control Alt Revolt came out independently, if I'm not mistaken, and it won the Dragon Award for Best Post-Apocalyptic Sci-Fi. Yeah, and I don't know, with indie publishing, it kind of feels like you have more of an interaction with your readers. Because when Praxis launched, I had numerous people say to me that they were buying it and they were going to read it, and I said, thank you very much, I hope you enjoy it. And besides the one review on Goodreads, which was a bit of a backhanded compliment, I had some pleasant reviews as well, which I'd like to think in part comes from me actually saying thanks to those who bought it.
Yeah, I find it really helps when you reach out like that. Like if you get a good review and you at least say thank you, or if you get a bad review and then contact that reader and be like, you spotted some good things. Would you mind being a beta read for my next book? Like that's a good way to go about it sometimes. Yeah,
I mean, with regards to that one on Goodreads, he gave it 2 out of 5 because part of the criticism was to my writing, which I took on board. And he said he finished after 2 chapters. I thought, ouch. But
Aww.
There you go.
Readers just have such a short attention span. I'll just blame it on that, because I thought your book was entertaining.
Thank you.
Was there a moment when you really thought, okay, self-publishing is where it's at? Did you try with traditional publishing at all, or you kind of from the start were just like, nope, I'm going to do my own thing?
No, because I've spoken to so many other self-published authors, and they had enjoyed success with it. I mean, you look at Robert Creasy, for example. He's one of the bigger self-published successes that I'm aware of. And again, I've watched him on Twitter, and he has stated that he's enjoyed it before, I believe. I think, anyway. And he's even put out books about how to be a successful indie author. So yeah, it was where I went to first. I might try indie publishing, see what it's like. But no, it's the freedom
the control,
that I like about. Yeah, it's the control to put in what you want to put in. Obviously, you do have to work with an editor, perhaps, to iron out the kinks, as I did with Praxis. But yeah, it's the freedom. Because I don't particularly like the idea of someone saying to me, you can't have that in this book, and if you don't take it out, you're gone.
Or they give you a cover that's just horrible and you gotta live with it.
Yes. There was a lady who published a book about getting deals with New York publishers who wrote about this in one of their chapters, and I thought, I would say so, they would probably get me in trouble. So yeah, I do like the idea of being able to have a hand in my own covers as to saying what goes on them, and the artist I work with, God bless her, she does such a wonderful job of bringing that to life.
Nice. Now, you're very into comics. How do you feel about the direction of the comic book world and Marvel versus DC right now? That bad, huh?
How do I put this? Not happy and disappointed and essentially cast of the older generation of readers.
Hmm.
The warning signs were there a little while ago when the article was published about the comic book retailers complaining about the drop in sales of their stores, of the big two. DC, I have to give them credit, they pulled it back and they realized obviously where they were going, and they didn't go down that direction with their works. And you can see on the monthly sales that they now rule the roost, and it's not hard to see with not only some of the works that are out, but also some of the creators that they've got on their payroll. Marvel, I don't even think I can call it that anymore, because it's not. It's now essentially a bunch of YA writers, some below average artists, and some awful storytelling, which I'm told is all in the name of inclusivity. But what they did was they essentially shoved the old readership to one side, such as changing Wolverine to a woman, Thor to a woman.
And if you don't like it, you're sexist, right?
Well, sexist, racist, whatever you want to say. And what Marvel didn't count on was that those that had the loudest voices about this sort of thing, complaining about it, and as they do online, they do not buy comics. And this has been evident in the sales drops of a number of their series, and even the cancellations of a few as well. I think it was the Iron Man. I think it was between issues 3 and 4, or 4 and 5. There was a drop of about 50,000 units between those issues, and it's just sad to watch. But at the same time, I was worried that perhaps my views would be rubbing off on my children, and I didn't want that. So I went to my local comic shop with my daughter one day, and I showed her the new Iron Man, and I said, "What do you think of that?" And she flicked a few pages into it and said, "No, I prefer the old one." And yeah, it's just so disappointing to watch. So a couple of years when this really got going, I stopped buying Marvel completely. I traded in a lot of the ones that I had. I stick to independent publishers now, because they, to me, seem to be focusing on stories where the individual is not a hero. They're an average person, average man or woman or whatever. And those stories are more interesting, because if a hero dies, you can guarantee they're just going to bring them back an issue or so down the road. But with these stories, that's not necessarily the case. Yeah, it's generally, that's how I feel about it. DC, the only major problem they've had is the odd silly little Trump reference here and there, and apparently naming a character ISIS as a way of combating him, which obviously wasn't very well thought of.
No, they didn't think that one through.
No, but also with Marvel, it's the attitude of their creators online. Dan Slott, for example, the writer of Spider-Man, he has a reputation, I'm told, of name searching himself on Twitter to see what's being said about him and getting into arguments with people. He did this with a YouTuber named Main Event TV. And the event chronicled the whole thing on his channel, till it got to a point where Slott pissed him off so much that he called him out and said, we need to meet publicly, because you wouldn't dare say this stuff to my face. And apparently that was the last thing he ever heard from him.
Interesting. I don't know what kind of conceit it takes to actually look up your name on Twitter just to see the gossip. I couldn't care less.
Well, he did it to me, because I saw Event's video and I said to him about it sometime later. I said, "Did you ever speak to anyone about him?" Because he was going to do a marathon for charity, and apparently some Marvel reps were going to be there. And he said, "Nah." And I said, because Slott behaved like a dick on Twitter about the whole thing, which I thought was fair comment. And the next day, Dan Slott blocked me, and I didn't even tag him.
Oh, man. These people with just such fragile egos.
Yeah.
You and I have talked in depth about the battle for diversity in literature, and you said there's some of that going on, like with Marvel Comics turning Thor into a woman and all that garbage. Tell me your thoughts on that front with the enforced diversity in literature.
The word diversity is the same to me as the phrase cultural appropriation. It's become a stick to bash people over the head with when a creator doesn't either write or put something in their videos or whatever of what is perceived to be a diverse set of characters. So as far as I'm concerned, that is the choice of the author if they're going to put any kind of diverse character in, depending on what the story is. You look at what was it? There's a series called America for Marvel, which was about I think a gay Latino lady, written by a gay Latino lady, and this was supposed to be a big diverse issue or something, but the sales for it dropped. And if it's forced, it's been accused of being, it's obvious. It detracts from the story. My approach to the whole thing is I never name the ethnicities of my characters unless it serves a purpose. I like to let the readers figure this thing out for themselves. You know, if they're reading the book and they think, you know, I think this guy's a black guy, then he's black. If he's white, then he's white. Because that was, I think, the approach that Shane Black used with the first Lethal Weapon. Murtaugh's ethnicity was never named in the script. So that was my approach to it.
Smart.
Yeah. And if you don't put diverse characters, as it were, in your books, then that's up to you. And it annoys me when you see people attacked for either not doing it or doing it wrong in the eyes of some of these folks out there. I think the book The Black Witch was a recent example of this. It hadn't even hit the bookshelves yet, and this book blogger, whose name escapes me, basically tried to burn this author's career. So, yeah.
I guess they think it gives them more credibility if they're the first to spot the racist or something.
Maybe, but what
you can't
worries
be that
me
fake
about it,
offended all the time.
no, but what worries me about it is if you don't do it, if you don't put quote unquote diverse characters in your books, you're called out for it. If you do put diverse characters in your books, you're called out for doing it wrong. There seems to be no pleasing some people in this regard. The next story I'm going to write, the main character is going to be a Japanese lady because of the plot of the story and what I'm doing with it, what its particular themes. I may get called out for that, I don't know, but because the story said to me, you know what, I think the character needs to be this and this and for these reasons, that's why I'm doing it. It's not to appease any particular subset of people.
So is this the first time you've done that, given in the past you haven't named the ethnicity?
Yes, it will be. My first ever book I wrote, which wasn't very good, I had
Our first books are never good.
No, this was bad. I had a space station, and the folks that were running it were a lesbian couple, because they were based on two people that I knew in real life, and one of them had told me her story of how she came out, and it was not a very pleasant story, and it stayed with me for some reason. And I said to her one day, could I use this for the book? And she went, sure. And I said, would you tell me the rest of the story? And she went, sure. So we had a cup of coffee, and she sat down and she told me the story, plus some details that I were not expecting. And that's how it wound up in the book.
It's interesting you have little conversations with people. Like, I'll be listening to people in a cafe, they'll say something odd, and it'll just end up in the book. I feel like as writers we turn into eavesdroppers.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, the main reason I come across her and that story, because we've been talking for a while, and I knew she was lesbian, but you know, it was not something that was brought up. But she had this tattoo on her arm of it was about here. It was of a string puppet with its strings clipped, and I asked the story behind it, not expecting to have such a story told to me, and that was the end result of it. And those two characters in that book were two of my favourites because of what they went through in particular in that story.
Awesome. So what would you say is the best writing advice you ever received?
Again, from Terry Pratchett in the letter, it was that if your story gets stuck, have two characters start a conversation. because they can often say where the story goes, and I used it a couple of times, I think, in Praxis. Um, and again, it works.
Excellent. I never really thought of it that way, but that's a good way to kind of have a lead in as far as where the story is going. You'll have to have the characters themselves tell you rather than trying to force something. So let me
Yeah.
ask you more about Praxis. Where did the inspiration for it come from?
One of my favorite sci-fi horror films was Alien,
Mm.
because it was, as Ridley Scott said in the making of, it was truckers in space.
Nice. I
My
didn't know that.
Yeah, and my dad was a truck driver all his life. Um, and I work in warehousing. I thought, well, what if I did a warehouse in space? And that's how the story came. And
Nice.
I based it off of the experience I had working in warehouses over the years, and I crafted the story from that. And yeah, it it's kind of funny looking back on it now, um, because a lot of the times parts of the story came from me saying to myself, what if this was in space? What if that was in space? Or what if that was in the future? Which was why when I talk about forklift trucks, they have no wheels. They float there. They hover, as it were. And trucks, sorry, heavy goods vehicles, they hover. They don't have wheels and so forth. It's little bits like that. Um,
Very creative.
yeah, and it was also came along with what if mankind's first contact with aliens was not a friendly one? What if they couldn't defend themselves? You know, it's essentially a series of what ifs strung together, and that's how it came to be.
I think that's how a lot of stories come to be. Like just the question, what if? Like I think of the
Mm.
film Night at the Museum, one of the few really unique films out there, I think, in recent years. And it was, what if a museum came to life? Like just so many stories can be started just by asking, what if? So, what advice
Mm.
would you give to novice authors who want to get their first book out there?
First of all, if you're not writing, uh, get writing, no matter what it is. Pick a short story or something that you could write about something in your life to get going. But don't be one of those people that says I'm going to write a book and then never does, because that was my direction at one point. Um, and I hadn't written anything for months because I just couldn't get the motivation. And then one day I saw an advert on my local TV station that talked about all those half-written manuscripts
And they're
that
just
authors
abandoned,
never
yeah.
finished. Yeah, they're in a pile in the corner, and I thought I don't want to be one of those, which
Don't
is why
don't
I
don't make an orphaned
yeah.
story.
So essentially, many people talk about writing their first book, but you need to do it. So sit yourself down in front of a keyboard, lock yourself away, and then come up with something. But
If you have to go on
don't talk
vacation
about
and
it,
get
just
a
do it.
cabin, do it. Yeah.
Yeah, or sit in a coffee shop and do it. Um, but don't be one of those folks that talks about it but doesn't do it. Do it.
Mhm. Yeah, I know a young woman, and she goes to a coffee shop every evening and stays there till it closes around midnight, and then gets up at 6 and goes to work again. I don't know how some people do it, but they find a way and get that hour in that they need to, or more.
Mm. It can be tough sometimes because I mean I'm a married father of four, and when I wanted to get into this more, I had to sit down with my wife and say, look, this is what I want to do. Would you support this? Because obviously it would mean I'll be upstairs a lot, and you would be dealing with the kids more than what you are now. And she said she was fine with it. Um,
Nice,
so
you had that support system. That's important.
yeah, my wife's a heavy reader. She she reads a lot of books, and she knew it was important to me because I told her the stories of writing stories when growing up, and even talked about it with her on our very first date, which was about 17 years ago now.
Right on. Wow, that's
Um,
amazing.
yeah, so she's always known it was important to me, but you need spousal support, especially if you've got a family. Um,
You need
but
to
yeah,
be able to
that's
get that hour in, or even a half hour to get a little bit of work done.
yeah, yeah. Essentially, you have to write something daily, and you have to get yourself into a routine. Um, and it helps to have no distractions as well. If you've got an internet when you're always watching YouTube as opposed to writing, turn off your internet, put your mobile phone to one side. Um,
Do what you gotta do.
Yeah, do what you got to do.
So what advice would you have for winning the culture war as far as literature is concerned?
This whole thing's gotten really messy because there's a lot of fighting going on between creators of any kind, which is why I've kept my distance from it all. And in my mind, the best way to go about it is just to create content and put it out there.
Mm-hmm.
Because one thing I've noticed about these folks, these SJWs, as it were, is they cannot create.
Yeah.
They can only do remakes. They can only stand on the shoulders of other people and change their work, as has happened with Marvel. And that's how you get ahead. You create things. I mean, this year I put out a book and a short story, which was more than what I did last year. So next year I'm aiming to try and put out 2 books, maybe even 3 if I can find the time. But you've got to create. You have to create. That's the idea. You getting into arguments with people on Twitter, in particular, it is not going to help you, because one thing I've noticed about these folks is that they can't argue against you, but they can shut you down. Mm-hmm. Twitter accounts have been banned, no reason is given, which I'm assuming is down to mass reporting. It happened to Vox Day the other day, I think, over something silly he said, which people used against him in the end. And I noticed a lot of the time he argues on Twitter with people, or he did argue on Twitter with people, in between the books he put out here and there. And I thought to myself, I don't want to do that sort of thing, because it's a waste of time and it's a waste of energy. Twitter is good, don't get me wrong, for interacting with people, sharing ideas and saying thank you to people that buy your stuff. But rowing with people on there, it's no good. And in the end, it's just a waste of energy. The last big row I think I had on there was one of these ridiculous hashtags that was going around, where people were trying to make Marvel make Captain America gay and give him a boyfriend. That. Yeah, and I tweeted about it and I said, I don't support this hashtag give Cap a boyfriend, make new characters, stop changing the old ones. And I got a humongous backlash on that. In fact, there were people tweeting at me from behind blocking programs, which I thought was quite funny. I think that was the last major I know. I think that was the last thing I personally got involved in, I think. But that's what you got to do. You have to create content. You have to create original content that people will read and enjoy. Try to leave politics out of it, because I think people have gotten so fed up with that lately. With Brexit, with Trump's election. I could go on, for example, and stuff like that. I think John Delarose, he put out For Steam and Country, which he has said himself is devoid of politics and it's just good fun. And the reviews on Amazon show that. I think he's gone past 70 5-star reviews, I think, at the time of this. So take that approach. I do put little digs in my stuff occasionally. For example, the short story I put out was kind of a poking the finger at the Berkeley riots a little bit, and some of the idiots that were involved in that. But that's the best answer I can give, is just to make content and put it out there.
Excellent. Well, I want you, before we go, I want you to show my viewers your shirt, because it's kind of awesome.
Oh, go on then.
Nice. And there's a story behind that shirt, right?
Yes, this was the shirt worn by Matt Taylor, who was the scientist. I think it was the Rosetta Stone project, where they landed the probe on the comet that was moving something like 300 miles an hour. But he was wearing this shirt in celebration, and all the feminist bullies on the internet went after him for it. Nice. And he was basically bullied into an apology, but no one realised that the maker of the shirt was a woman. And she was horrified as to the way he was being treated for it, and the shirt went on general sale, and I got one.
I like it. So last but not least, tell my viewers where they can find your work and your book.
Praxis is on Amazon. You can get it in ebook, or if you prefer, paperback.
Nice.
which is nice to hold. I'll be honest. I'd had a chat with a friend, and he had said paperback for the win, which I didn't quite agree with until I held a copy of my own and thought, wow, I guess there is some magic still in these things.
Yeah.
All my work is on Amazon, and it's all reasonably priced because I'd like to sort of bring people in, as it were.
And your blog?
My blog is Stories from My Grandmother's Floor. It's on Blogspot, and like I said, I just talk about stuff that appeals to me personally. I appreciate all that stop by and read it.
Nice. Well, everyone stop by his blog and pick up a copy of Praxis. I helped him edit it, and it was wonderful. So take care, everyone. Until next time. Bye.
Bye bye.